Hello, and welcome to ISAPA and the second Nordic panel. My name is Riikka Juntunen, and I'm going to be the chair of the next session. We'll start this with the presentations from different Nordic countries. This takes approximately 50 minutes, and after the presentations, we'll have time for questions, answers, and discussion. Whatever questions you have, you may already write them down to the chat during these presentations, and we'll get back to them after the first round. Please keep your cameras and microphones off during these presentations. Hope you have enjoyed ISAPA so far, and let's begin this tour through the Nordic countries.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to ISAPA and the Nordic panel 2. In this panel, we're going to talk about how are national sporting organizations working to include. My name is Riikka Juntunen. I work in the National Paralympic Committee in Finland as Secretary General, and it's my honor to be the moderator in this panel. But first of all, few words about the Nordic cooperation. Working together, it's not really our idea who are here presenters. It's the way it has been done for a long time ago. The Nordic Sports Association for the Disabled, known as Nordic, was founded in 1976. The Nordic brings together Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and Faroe Islands. And in this Nordic panel, we'll have the examples of the countries from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. Unfortunately, we are missing Faroe Islands, but we don't forget the Faroe Islands here. All the member organizations work from international to local levels. They represent different structural orientation towards physical activity and sports for people with a disability, and they cover a broad range of disability sports. For instance, lesser disability sports, Special Olympics and Paralympic sports, but they also cover the mainstream sports as sports federations. Why we do this, why we work together, the benefits are that we share the same vision, and we want to create and develop the best sports cooperation environment among parasports organizations worldwide. So we want to be the best, and we have decided that when we want to be the best, and if we have that goal and we want to achieve that goal, the only way to do it is work together. And our mission is to join forces among parasport organizations in the Nordic region by acting as 6 nations and 1 team. We want to improve sports performance, increase the political influence, and also maximize the social impact. And what we're going to do here in this panel, we're going to travel to these 5 countries here. We start our trip in Denmark, where we have Peter Koch Hansen, who works as a development manager. And from Denmark, we have a flight to Finland. We'll have Aija Saari, who works as research manager at the Finnish Paralympic Committee. And from Finland, we'll travel to Iceland, and we'll meet Ingi Einarsson, who is lecturer and researcher at the university in Reykjavik and the high performance coordinator in NPC Iceland. And from Iceland, we'll jump to Norway, where we have Mats Andreasen, who works at the Norwegian Olympic and Paralympic Committee and Confederation of Sports. Mats is head of activity development there. And the last country, but not the least, is Parasport Sweden and Linda Torres, who is the development manager in Sweden. So let's start. Peter, your turn.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for participating in this conference and also this discussion on inclusion in the Nordic countries. It's likely that we have the same issues. But in Denmark, we focus on very different or the new approaches, and when we like to share them with you. The vision of Parasport Denmark, and Parasport Denmark is the main sports organization for sports participation for all in Denmark. We are part of this main sports organization in Denmark with 62 other organizations, and we try to facilitate all sports for people with disability from grassroots to elite level. The vision in Parasport Denmark is to be the most relevant organization initiating sport for people with a disability. And by saying that, we want to be the most relevant partner, both for sports organizations, for private partners, for the target groups, and also for the public or the municipalities in Denmark. So we want to be the main or the key factor in facilitating disability sports for all. And we just made a new mission for that, and to succeed, we look at three main initiatives. It's strong partnerships with all kinds of sectors, both public, private, and the target groups we're facing. We want to focus more on the knowledge and knowledge-based initiatives. So not just saying, I have this knowledge, or I have this experience. We want to face with data and evidence-based knowledge. That's a new thing in Denmark, approaching our partners with the new knowledge. And a new thing, maybe it's not that new, but we want to focus on the handheld activities. So focusing on the people who are in direct contact with our target groups and facilitating the contact between the front personnel, the target groups, and us as a sports organization and our local clubs. So this is how we work, and how we work for the next 5 years in Parasport Denmark. Conflicts and concerns facing inclusion for all. We see when we look at our target groups, it's evident that there's a much lower participation in the sports clubs. We see, for example, that children participating in sports clubs is 40% lower than the average child in Denmark. And seeing that, we see the parents saying that 70% of the parents want their child with a disability to participate. And of course, also, we have seen that local clubs are ready to include people with a disability. It's 50 to 60% of the local clubs are saying, yeah, we want to include people with a disability. So the big question is, where's the gap when people say, I want to participate, and the clubs are saying, yes, come to us, come to train, come to compete in our clubs. So that's one of the issues we want to face in Denmark. And how can we identify and approach these things? So that's an example we want to see. And that's why we are focusing on partnerships, the knowledge-based initiatives, and the handheld activities. The partnerships we want to do is not new, but the way we want to identify the partnerships is by, again, using knowledge and seeing and analyzing who are the best and the most beneficial for us in Parasport Denmark. So we need to look both at target groups, organization for the target groups, we look at municipalities, and we look at the sports organization as well, and prioritize these partnerships and doing a fully commitment with those partners. So everybody is joining, and not just us as Parasport Denmark, but also our partner in this. And by that, and by the commitment, both resources and time will be prioritized. And we see this as an example for how to include in a better way or in a new way. And also seeing, for example, in the municipalities that we need to do a lot more commitment with the professionals in the municipalities. When we talk about knowledge, it's not just knowledge that I have with the coaches, but it's also knowledge at a local level, at the municipalities with, for example, the therapists or the teachers. They need to know more about parasports and the way how to include and why to include. We want to do a lot more. We want to go back in the municipalities and present new knowledge from national and local surveys using our cooperation with, example, the universities, and putting new knowledge and how to include and why to include into these partnerships as well. And when we're seeing at the handheld approach, it is going out with our knowledge to the front personnel in the organizations, within the municipalities, within the sports clubs, for the parents, and go one-on-one to those people. And going with our role models, we're using our own athletes as role models, taking them out, meeting our new athletes, and also using the best coaches. So we want to develop and educate the best coaches, and then highlighting the best clubs as well, because not every club is ready or the best for the inclusion. And again, we want to do a follow-up. And by saying follow-up, it's not just including a child, for example, into a club and just say, thank you, now you're on your own. No, we want to go back to the club, want to go back to the family, we want to go back to the coach and just do follow-up. So everybody is on track with how to perform and how to include. An example of this is just a project we just initiated in Denmark. It's called Team Rising Stars. Rising Stars facing all of these three focus areas: the partnership, the knowledge, and the handheld inclusion. And by this, we're saying that we find or recruit partnerships with rehabilitation centers across Denmark. We are focusing on 3 sports: table tennis, athletics, and swimming. So again, we're prioritizing our sports. We are prioritizing our partners at the rehabilitation centers. We make this or find this commitment with the therapist working with the child and the family at the rehabilitation center. And by that, we are putting new knowledge into these professionals working with the children on how to look on parasport and how to know more about parasports and the possibilities in parasport. And we're also handing out strategies and physical focus areas. So the professionals or the partners, they can see at that potential new athlete and say, I want to present table tennis, for example, for you. And then they bring in our coaches and our role models to the rehabilitation center, where the role model meets the child and the family. And by that, we're using the respect of the professionals. We're using the confidence the professionals and the family has to each other, and by putting sports into their partnership. And then we're finding the best and highly qualified coaches and local clubs for these children, and presenting as well a youth group, a weekly training for this youth group with our coaches and our role models. So by defining partnerships and putting knowledge into those partnerships, we see very strong commitment, and we see almost no dropout in these sectors, because we start with a commitment from therapists and family and trainer, and we go to the local club and do the follow-up with the local clubs. And by that, we're focusing on these 3 main areas. And we see by that we can build on top, and that's what we're doing in Parasport Denmark for the next couple of years, is enhancing our focus on partnerships and bringing the parasports to the partners, not looking just as us, as sports organization, but also looking at the partners and their commitments to help recruit and include. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Peter. That was inspiring. Inclusion is the reality, and we all need to understand this. And we'll get back to this after the presentation, so be ready in the panel. I'll have a few questions about this. And the next country where we will go is Finland. Aija, it's your turn.
Hello, everybody. It was very nice to hear Danish thoughts about inclusion and inclusion challenge. In my presentation, I will focus in the inclusion challenge and give some concrete examples how it has affected the way we do things today in the Finnish Paralympic Committee. As a long-term employee in disability sport, I've seen this change during 3 decades. First in my work as a youth sport coordinator in the 90s, And to be honest, my work then was based on the medical approach. For instance, it was quite normal to offer sports according to children's diagnosis. The idea of inclusion inspired me and my colleagues to launch first inclusion projects in the early 2000s. And this contradiction between medical and social didn't leave me alone. Today, I'm an inclusion researcher trying to combine theory in practice and using research skills to make sense of this all. If I put 30 years into one sentence, there has been a shift from disability specific and special and segregated towards open for all and mainstream. Currently, most of our 70 national sport-specific federations have programs for persons with disabilities or have taken responsibility of parasport. The process is still ongoing. However, at the grassroots, disability-specific opportunities are offered parallel to open for all hobby options. And actually, that is also what we wish to preserve. For a person with a disability, there are both good and bad news. Inclusive change has created more opportunities to do sports and to reach for one's potential. There is a wider variety of different options in the mainstream, but not that many in the disability specific. The problem is that from each individual point of view, interesting, suitable and available hobby options are harder to find. Segregated special groups and classification as disabled can be really total no for an inclusion-minded family. And all too often, if the person happens to have a suitable classification for Paralympic sports, they are offered competitive choices only. And recommending of a mainstream sport club for a recently disabled young adult who has no earlier athletic background can be really a disaster. In many localities, and especially smaller municipalities, there are not enough services available, or the existing sporting opportunities don't match the individual needs nor preferences. So what can we do? Firstly, there is no turning back. From CRPD, Convention of Persons with Disabilities, point of view, we should have both options available. We, as service providers, have tried to find ways to balance between the mainstream and separate. We call it dual approach, but really some call it is a chaos. Dual approach means that an inclusion-minded parasport professional has to master two different mindsets, be flexible, and most of all, be able to listen to our target groups and their wishes. The quick questions for us all are: can the person with disabilities make a choice where, how, when and with whom they wish to do sports? And what can we do to improve their opportunities to make the choice? Bearing that in mind, I will give some examples of some programs. My first example comes from youth sports. We started to tackle the supply and demand problem with the PAPAI program. PAPAI comes from a personal adapted physical activity instructor. It's Valtti in Finnish. During these 5 years, we have had more than 1,000 kids with disability or special needs running that program, and more than 1,300 students getting study credits by volunteering as PAPAIs. Approximately 50% reported that they found a hobby. The most important success factors were that there was a good coach and that the participant had influence on the tryouts. For many kids, this was the first time they were asked what they wished to do as a hobby. My second example is Löydä oma seura, Finnish hobby finder tool in the web. It was created because the students acting as PAPAIs gave us feedback that suitable hobby options were hard to find. It also helps sport clubs to advertise their services. These two examples has the person with the disability in the center. My third example has an opposite angle. Project Avoimet Ovet, which is open doors in English, was launched to assist sport clubs to open their doors for persons with disabilities. By helping the clubs to become more inclusive, we can increase hobby options. The key information has been collected to the Open Doors website, available for all sport clubs. In general, an inclusive sport club is usually a mainstream one which may struggle with such issues as: should we launch a disability-specific group or find ways to get persons with disabilities into general activities? Should we focus in elite, health, or participation? Where are they? Who are they? And how do we reach them? Are they para-athletes? Are they Special Olympics athletes, or maybe deaf, having transplant organs, or other long-term illnesses? How do we finance these activities? What about accessibility? What do we have to know about disability services such as equipment, personal assistance, or transport? And where do we find coaches, trainers, and volunteers, and so on? A survey for sport clubs was conducted last autumn to answer some of these questions. Results are reported on Friday in another presentation of the ISAPA conference. And finally, if we wish to keep on doing our jobs properly in disability sports or parasports, we need good guidelines and strategies. In addition, we need tools that help us to implement these strategies into practice. One practical example is this pic. Sorry, it's maybe a bit blurry, but it's based on Canadian long-term athlete development. It's our modification, Finnish Paralympic Committee's modification of this LTAD model. We call it Athletes and Volunteers Path. It's a cultural map of different phases from grassroots to elite level. It helps us to locate our services and programs and having a dialogue with our networks. Parasports can't be developed alone without good national networks. It is also useful to take a look and reflect what others are doing. We have a long road with our Nordic companions, and I look really forward to learn more today. Thank you. Kiitos.
Thanks, Aija. We cannot forget the UN CRPD when we are talking about disability sport. So thanks for reminding us about the UN, the CRPD. Next one is Iceland and Ingi. So let's go to Iceland.
Thank you for this introduction. My name is Ingi, and I will tell you a little bit about how Iceland organizes sport for disabled persons in Iceland. I'm here basically because I'm a researcher for University of Reykjavik, but I was also a coach in the past. Currently, I'm the high performance director for NPC Iceland, but my main interest is being father to two daughters. My plan today, in those short 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, is to tell you a little bit about Iceland, because we're often unique in many ways, and how we organize sports for people with disabilities in Iceland. I will tell you about our inclusion strategy, recruitment ideas, and then maybe the challenges we have in the end. But just so we realize that Iceland is larger than many people think. We are, for example, 2.5 times larger than Denmark, but we only have 350,000 inhabitants. Around 200,000 of them live in the capital area, which sort of makes okay critical mass. But outside the capital area, the population is very scarce, and there are very few cities who have few thousand people or more outside of the capital area. Another thing that people might not know is that we are not very good in winter sport, because even though we have winter almost all year, the weather for winter sport outdoor is not ideal, to say the least. But in general, we have very good facilities who are available for the athletes to do indoor sport all year round. And that includes also disabled athletes. The Sport Federation for People with Disability is called Íþróttasamband Fatlaðra, or EF. It is rather special that EF originates from within the mainstream sport. It was in the 1970s when the mainstream sport organization of Iceland realized that they should do something better or more for individuals with disabilities. So it was founded from within the National Olympic Committee of Iceland. And for over 40 years, they have been full members of NOC Iceland. EF and its sport clubs are the only organization that officially organize sport for people with disabilities in Iceland. And from the beginning, and all this year, it has always been all the disabilities. We have had the parasport, the Special Olympics, Virtus. The deaf athletes, they did their own program for a while, but they're back in now with EF. But this is something that is quite special and unique for Iceland, that we have always had this. We are all together in one office, in one organization, and EF tries to organize it from the grassroots all the way to the elite sport for all the different disabilities. So there has never been any kind of discrimination in Iceland. If you try to look at it in some kind of flowchart, then the National Olympic Committee, or NOC Iceland, is on top. And underneath them, they have all the special federations, like football, athletics, swimming, and all the other federations. And then you have EF on the same level as the other sport federation. And of course, EF is a multi-sport federation. And if, for example, an athlete is competing or training with a mainstream club, he and his club automatically becomes part of EF. Or in swimming. There are, at the moment at least, a lot of athletics individuals with disabilities and swimmers with disabilities who train and compete with their mainstream sport club. But at the same time, they are full members of EF. This cooperation has been really working well for us. EF still exists as a federation. I know in other countries they have abolished it and fully made disability swimming under the Swimming Association and so on. But this works for us so far. Having said that, that might be one of the reasons why there is no official plan to increase inclusion for athletes with disabilities into the mainstream sport. It doesn't mean that we're not trying to have more inclusion. It is like there is no official plan to do this. Many of the athletes we find now, we find them in the mainstream sport club because they're getting more and more open to have them join. There are strong and really well-established sport clubs for people with disabilities in the capital area. And those sport clubs might include 200 or 300 athletes who are actively doing sport. So we have not found a big reason to move from that kind of segregation settings. And we are not trying to close down those clubs because, at least for us, it really works. Some of the mainstream clubs, they have integration groups, like they have integrated groups with athletes with disabilities into their system. And that also works for us. But many, or I would like to say, most high-level para-athletes in the later years, they have all been coming from fully inclusion settings. We are a little bit struggling with recruitment now, but we have our big Paralympic day where all the sports for disabilities in Iceland are showcased. But maybe our strongest links are the PE teachers. Iceland is not that big, and the PE teachers have a organization where we can sort of ask them to pass on information to athletes or to individuals who have challenges in PE in the schools. We do go through the physiotherapists as well, because many of our disabled athletes go through there. We still have some special schools where it is at least where it is easier to find at least the II, the intellectually impaired athletes. They're still in there's at least one big special school in Iceland where we can find them. Plus those special clubs, the special clubs for individuals with disabilities, they often advertise open day where everybody's invited. And then we also invited the siblings of the athletes who might have disabilities. So it's like an open day and an open door policy. The challenges we have at the moment is really to educate more coaches. Because with more inclusion, we need more coaches who are expertly trained to deal with disabled athletes. We need to educate the athletes themselves, because we often find that people with disabilities, they lack the knowledge of the importance of sport or what sport can give them. We need to find personal support, not necessarily money, but the individuals with a high support need, they often need a specific help during the practices. And this is especially important for inclusion settings. And yes, we need to find more athletes, but I guess we all do. Thank you for listening from this short presentation from Iceland. I would just like to remind you that it's never about a disability. It's always about the ability. Thank you.
Thanks, Inge. I'll have a question for you, but I'm going to ask it later on when we are talking live. The next country is Norway. Mats, Andreas, and it's your turn.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I'm going to talk a bit about the Norwegian model and how we've organized it in Norway, and the pros and cons about organizing it in that way. In Norway, we've chosen to organize all sport under one umbrella, which means we're both the Olympic Committee, we're the Paralympic Committee, we're the Deaf Olympic Committee, and the Special Olympic Committee. And we also have the rest of the mass sport and grassroots participation, and also company sports within one organization. The backdrop for this is our vision, the vision of joy of sport for all. It's a demanding vision, it's a challenging vision, but it also makes us think all the way, how can we include everybody in the same organization? Why did we have an integration process in Norway? We've come a long way since the first integration started, but the backdrop of it was that there was also a political pressure on inclusion in Norway. And I think the sport organizations are a mirror of what goes on in the society around them. So in Norway, 98% of children with a disability are integrated into mainstream schools, which makes it natural also to be integrated into their local sport clubs. We saw in the traditional handicap sport teams that the average age of the traditional clubs were getting 1 year older each year. They were struggling to recruit new athletes. The Norwegian geography is another challenge. People are living in a lot of rural areas and having to travel several hours to participate or to practice together with other kids with a disability is less likely than participating in your local sport club with your classmates. We saw that there was also a wish and a need to increase the sport competence, which could be drawn from the other federations. And as I said, inclusion and equality was important values for NIF. So thinking about sport for all I think this was the only option our politicians had at that time. About the integration process without going too deep into the history. The Handicap Sport Organization had their first assembly in 1972, and I think it's quite interesting that their main vision was actually to shut down their own organization when the Norwegian sport had taken fully over also athletes with a disability. I think there were three important steps into the integration process. Firstly, it took time. It started, the first federations took over in 97 and the last ones took over in 2007. And making sure that the federations were ready to take over the athletes was important for us. Secondly, there was fresh funding. To avoid having the federations to compete over funding within their own federation when there was another group of athletes coming in, I think was an important part that we could increase their funding at the same time. And thirdly, we kept a lot of the administration from the Handicap Sport Organization, both at the national level, but also at the local level, to make sure that there was enough assistance for the clubs. A process like this doesn't go without challenges, and integration process hasn't solved all the challenges we already had. A challenge of, I think, all of the Nordic countries is that we are a lot of organizations built on volunteerism, which means we are totally dependent on volunteers wanting and willingly to organize these kinds of sport activities as well. And reaching out to grassroots level, reaching out to 10,000 sport clubs and creating an ownership, of course, takes time. Building also knowledge. We had the coaches and staff coming over from the handicap sport federations, but also building knowledge in the new coaches that comes in every year to try and create the understanding on how we can adapt your sport to also include athletes with a disability. Recruiting new athletes is still a challenge, which is probably in several countries. And especially we see that for one group, those athletes that have a need of extensive personal assistance have been more challenging. And here is an area where we really need, and we try to focus on the cooperation with the municipalities. I think that looking at parasport now and looking to parasport in the future is four things that we need to remember and also to increase attention to. First of all, visibility. Trying to get parasport more visible in communities in general, in local communities and also at national level is quite important to show what the opportunities are. Increasing knowledge, as I said, focusing on coach development, for example, making sure that coaches basically know their own sport and are confident with that, but adding that extra dimension that how do you adapt this sport if you get a blind athlete or someone coming in a wheelchair, how do you adapt to that? Creating an inclusive environment, which means that sport clubs understand that joy of sport for all also includes your sport club. And it has to be a vision that also goes all the way down to the grassroots. And I think lastly, focusing less on organization, focusing less on problems, but actually having an athlete focus is probably the main thing to take away. We can't look at people with disabilities as a pack of birds that are all similar or the same, have the same wishes. People with a disability have, as all of you know, are just as different from each other than from other athletes. I don't think there's one model for integration, and I'm happy to say that I don't think the Norwegian model is right for everybody. But I think that the most important part of it is to try and think, what are we going to achieve? And for us, creating a safe and inclusive environment is the main target, which means we can organize it in different ways. You could either have athletes like myself, for example, in an alpine skiing club, the only athlete with a disability being fully integrated into a sport club. You can have clubs that build up an environment where you have a club that have maybe 10 athletes with a disability training together. Or you could have, as we had with the handicap sport teams, and we still have today, totally segregated groups, but within a club. For example, for people with intellectual disabilities, we see that creating that safe environment also means having them in a segregated group, but being part of the same club with the same logo. Another positive aspect of the integration process is that we have had a consistent increase in the number of sport clubs having parasport all over the country. Even though we don't see a huge increase in athletes, we see that there are every year around 5% more clubs taking on and reporting that they have athletes with a disability. We're very glad for that. And lastly, para elite sport, probably the first place we could see the fruits bearing, because first of all, some of the federations inherited athletes from the Handicap Sports Organization. But we see how important it is to take part and be part of the sporting federation where the sport you've chosen actually is organized. So it's more important to know the sport than to know the disability. We see a lot of cooperation between the Paralympic and Olympic athletes. Some federations have come really far and have fully integrated systems. Others have maybe training camps together, while others don't have contact at all. So there's different models here as well. And thirdly, or fourthly, actually, I think it's important that we try to, as an organization and as a one umbrella organization, make sure that we also lift up the role models from the Paralympic movement and have those role models just as visible as the other role models. And that will create that visibility that I wanted to talk about. And I think that the final goal, or the great picture for me, is the way we take these pictures. Team Norway is a fully integrated Olympic and Paralympic team, going to different competitions, but still being part of the same package, media-wise, training-wise. So I think Team Norway is, for me, the greatest example of how inclusion can solve a lot of issues as well. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mats. It's always nice to hear how it's going on in Norway. That's one of the countries I think all your Nordic neighbors has been really looking, because the structure is a little bit different than what we others have. I think the greatest part for me was in the beginning when you shared the vision, joy of sport for all. That's something we cannot forget, although we want also to see the medals and Team Norway and team of Finland, Sweden, Iceland, whatever country. We want the success comes when we enjoy the sport. So thanks, Mats. And our final presentation today is from Sweden. Linda Toras, it's your turn.
Hello everyone, my name is Linda Toras and I'm from Parasport Sweden, as Riikka presented me, and I'm very thankful as well to be part of this panel today. And I'm going to share a bit about how we work with inclusion and recruitment of parasport in an organizational perspective, and also shortly about how we work with, of course, recruitment of athletes with disability in Sweden currently. And I'm Linda Toras, as I mentioned. I work since 3 years back in Sweden with the process of competence support, that we call it today, regarding parasport in Sweden. And I actually previously worked in Norway, so it was good to hear Mats just now, and I recognize myself, of course, a lot. And it's also given me a very good opportunity that I worked in Norway to also bring what Mats also mentioned, both the positive and the challenges with the included or integrated model, so to say, in Norway. I've also the last couple of years worked closely with the university in Umeå in Sweden, where we have the opportunity to have them, a whole team of the researchers actually following the inclusion process in Sweden. So we are looking forward to also get more sort of academic results regarding our inclusion process further on. This is how sort of the Swedish sport organization looks today in 2021. You can see that it's very different from the Norwegian model. We have, as you can see on your left side, the Swedish Olympic Committee. That is a separate organization that deals only with Olympic sport in Sweden. And then we have Riksidrottsförbundet, which is the Confederation of Sport in Sweden, that has today actually 72 member organizations, member sports, national federations. The newest ones are paddle, that you might know about, and also Icelandic horse riding Federation that has really worked hard to be part of the Confederation of Sport. They was just elected into the Confederation this weekend. And then we have Parasport Sverige, that is sort of an umbrella name for both the Swedish Paralympic Committee, but also our Swedish Federation of Parasport. And we are also the accredited organization for Special Olympics in Sweden. And of course, we are members of many other organizations internationally in regards to disability sport. But as you can see, it's 3 different organizations. And that's quite important to understand when I'm moving further with my presentation. As you can see here, I've explained this more in detail here. You can also see that, for example, I didn't mention Deaf Sport Federation, which is also a member of the Confederation of Sport in Sweden. And they are, of course, also a member of the International Committee for Sport for the Deaf, the ICSD. But they are a separate organization from Parasport Sweden, and they are not currently working actively with inclusion. What are we doing with inclusion of parasport in Sweden? It's sort of 2 parallel processes, I would say. The first process is that the Swedish Parasport Federation already in 2013 decided that, okay, we believe that the sport should be where it belongs. We need to mainstream our sport codes, because we believe that then the sport can flourish and be better for the athletes and the future athletes in parasport. So since that time, it's been an active work with including sports. Today, it's 5 different sports that are included, and we are 12 sports remaining. So the Parasport Federation in Sweden is today 12 sports. And of course also working to develop those sports parallel with the inclusion process. Because of this process started really 2013, 14, 15, we have realized that many of the other sport codes or sport federations in Sweden also have started to work. Some of them had already worked with parasport, of course, and we know that today it's about 60 of the sport codes that actually work with parasport. But because of this became a bigger part of the discussion of sport, that is actually this is something that you should be totally natural for the sports to do. We have seen together with the Confederation of Sport that we need to have a more equal and better competence support for all the sports in Sweden. So the last 2 years or so, we have worked really intense together with the Confederation of Sport, where also several of the sport codes has been involved in how can we shape and what should a competence support really include to be able to cover the whole country, as I mentioned here, and also the entire sport fraternity. When it comes to the local club, the support they need, when it comes to working with the municipality, when it comes to the federations, maybe board that they should understand the opportunities and to be able to take the right decisions when it comes to giving and creating good opportunities for sport and parasport in their respective sport. So this has been 2 parallel processes that are still going on. And this weekend at the biannual General Assembly meeting for the entire sport in the Sport Confederation, it was a historic decision taken actually that this competence support is now going to be developed the next 2 years intensely. So what about recruitment of para-athletes in Sweden? Looking back at what I just mentioned about the inclusion process, in Parasport Sweden, we have sort of taken on the responsibility and positioned ourselves in a way that, okay, we, as we are including our sports, we need to be there for other sports. We need to create opportunities, arenas, where other sport codes that we not necessarily are responsible for also get the arena to work with recruitment. So what we've done, we have 2 main sort of big projects that goes across the sports, and that we have also in the higher level of decision making also had a cooperation with the Confederation of Sport. And that's one that we call the Start Your Impossible Camp, where it's really a camp where several sports and the sport coaches are then invited. You invite them to be able to share. We are in different places, 6 places around the country every year, and we have then also the local sport clubs, or as local as possible, because of course sometimes it's not a super local sport club that is running that exact sport. But then it's important then to create those opportunities in advance, those connections. We have meetings with the clubs in advance. The camp is 3 days where also the athletes are able to also meet other athletes with similar opportunities and challenges, and also creating that opportunity for relationships between also parents and coaches across sports. So that's one of the things that we've developed over the years, and it's better and better. And this is that we do this together with the other sports in Sweden. The other thing that we've developed the last few years is something we call Parami. It's actually a website, something that I know many other countries already have and developed, because you've probably seen the similar challenges with recruitment, because as you know, we also can't pinpoint campaigns or information to persons with disability due to the authorities that we have, which is obviously good. But what we've done, we have had reference groups to develop this website. So and we also done it with one of the organizations that really work very strongly with accessibility in regards to media. So it should really fit for all the disability groups. And today it's actually, as you can see, 63 different sports that are part of this website, and it's the 450 sport clubs that have registered their activities. And until today, this was launched in November 2020. We have 15,000 already unique visitors. So we believe, and because we're working with this for all the sports in the country, we hope that this can continue. And then, of course, elite. I think a lot what Mats already mentioned. This is also something we believe. We believe that the elite inclusion can really break the way for the inclusion of sort of the grassroots sports, and can be a good example, and cooperation with the Olympic Committee and of course Confederation of Sport in this regard has been going really well. And another decision was taken also this weekend, where people are really standing behind this cooperation and this Elite 2030, as we're calling it in Sweden. So we are really part of this, and it's really important for us, and we believe that it's the way to go. Okay, thank you from Sweden.
Thanks, Linda. And thank you, Peter, Aija, Ingi, Mats, and Linda, for the great presentations what we had. The audience, you heard 5 Nordic examples of inclusion in sports. In the Nordics, we share the same values, and our societies are quite the same. We have a lot in common, and it makes it makes us very easy to work together. We also want to share the best practices, so we've been looking very carefully what Parami does, and how Denmark is doing with their program, and so on. So we also want to share the best examples with you. So if you have any questions, please, now you have time to ask our experts, and they will answer you. Thanks for following this first part of our presentations, and now it's time for the panel.
Yes, so welcome to our living rooms, offices, and wherever we are. for the people who are following here, I just saw that we were like 61 people here, and it's great to have you all here. We said that we have some questions in the chat. I'm not sure whether you've been reading them, but there was a talk about education, and really good example that I think if we really want to succeed in inclusion, we cannot do it without education. And Inge spoke a little bit about education and the experts and so on, but I also heard some other examples. Does anyone of you want to share an example of working together with a university or polytechnical university or something else, to how did you go on with that in order to succeed in inclusion? Linda?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm going to try to answer. I think the cooperation with universities in general is very, very important. I was also listening to some of the panel discussions yesterday, and I think it's crucial to use now the opportunity that several of the universities get funding to actually go deeper into this research. And I believe that cooperation and also trying to do the research as practical as possible. I think what Peter was mentioning, it's important. How can we get and show the effect of sport for people with disabilities, for the broader public, the stakeholders, to really be able to do even better in this field. When it comes to also physical education, I think that's also very important, because it's very often the first time a pupil is sort of exposed to sport. So I think there also, and teachers' education in this regard, and I know also some of the panel discussion and mini seminars has been around this subject already in this conference. We need to really work together to move on with this research, and also cooperate with the leisure part of the sport that we are sort of representatives of here.
Yeah.
Not sure if I answered anything, but this is just some reflections. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Inge.
Thank you. Yeah, I know I said in my presentation we need to educate the coaches. And both my university, University of Reykjavik, and University of Iceland, I think we are doing okay job in that. But it should also be mentioned, like somebody was asking here or talking about in the chat, we need to educate more than just the coaches, because at least in Iceland, most of the clubs are voluntary-based run. So there are chairmen, board members, all sort of kind of, what do you call it, speed bumps or hurdles that might be still, at least today in Iceland, more resistant to this idea than the actual coaches. So it has to be looked at from a more perspective than only the athletes and the coach. But even though I think the relationship between the athletes and the coach is the most relevant. But again, we need to reach out to more people than athletes and coaches.
Yeah, totally agree. And there are, if we think a person with a disability here, there are a lot of people, experts around him or her. So we have teachers, therapists, occupational therapists, social workers, etc. And when we speak about physical activities, it cannot only be like a teacher in school or parents who will speak about, or the therapist who speak about physical activity. I think everybody should have some knowledge about sport for people with disabilities. Mats, do you want to? Yeah, go on.
Thank you. And education is a very interesting subject. I would say that I was surprised how little focus there is on in the academic sector on parasport in general, and also people with disabilities. It's usually quite medically aimed when it comes to this research. There's been an increase in Norway, and we see Viljar here also mentioning it in the chat. in developing equipment, a competition equipment, where we see a great cooperation and trying to emphasize on how we can develop that. But in general, I think there's a lot of research on barriers for participation, but very little focus on how to solve these problems instead. I think coming down to education, when we look at the sport clubs and how we educate the sport clubs, I think it's not that much about education and more about awareness and raising awareness of the role that the organization has in including all athletes, because the most important thing for anyone, and maybe especially people coming in with different challenges into a sport club, is the first meeting. And making sure that the coach that meets you or the leader of the sport club says, you know what, I don't know anything about this, but you're very welcome, we'll figure it out. Instead of saying, I don't know what to do with this, I've heard of someone else in a neighboring club, maybe you should go there. So you don't feel welcome. So raising that awareness of the challenges we have and the responsibility we have is very important for all sport structures. And then of course the formal education is important, but there's too few taking it. But what we've done in Norway is that we have a common framework for all coaches' education, no matter which sport it is. You have to have a small part about Paralympic sport or about parasports or adapted sports in all at the basic level, where the grassroots coaches are educated. No matter if you take it in football or skiing or whatever you take, you always learn a little bit about how do you adapt your sport to different challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Mats. I think we could talk about education the whole session here, but I'll just take one comment about there's a Kwok asks about the We the 15 campaign, but shortly, We the 15 is the campaign that is run by International Paralympic Committee. And I think in all the Nordic countries will be somehow or in different ways part of that campaign. It'll start 19th of August and it'll go on something like 10 years. So it's not only one small campaign. It wants to raise up 15% of people around the world, so 15% that have a disability. So we're not concentrating on Paralympic athletes, but people with disabilities overall. And I think we've been talking about using athletes or using the Paralympic athletes like not examples, but those who, because they are in the news and they are somewhere, especially during the Paralympic Games. So when they can speak, they speak not only from themselves, but other people with a disability as well. So it's going to be the Purple Day, and we'll use the purple color will be used around the world, and we'll see how it goes. Thanks, Kwok, for that one. And we have a question: how does the different countries cooperate with different manufacturers in assistive devices for activity in getting better and more competitive equipment, as there is any cooperation with scientists in developing new devices like we do in Norway? What do you do in Norway?
Maybe Viljar should be better to answer that, but there's a cooperation on developing competition equipment. Because a lot of the equipment, for example, our national rower, there's never been developed very much rowing equipment for people with disabilities. So looking at how can we make it lighter, more functional, and less injury or more injury preventive. For example, also the sledge hockey team has been developing different seats for the sledge hockey equipment, just to mention a couple of examples. And it's part of the elite sport to always think about margins and how we can get things more functional. But I think the research done will also spin off to the mass participation by giving more functional equipment also to all athletes.
Yeah, thanks. Aija.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to the earlier discussion about education and jump into the equipment, because I think one of the very good latest years innovation has been the very close cooperation with the universities and those students who are dealing with these kind of technical issues and equipment. So we have a very good relationship with, for instance, Metropolia University in Helsinki area, and their technical students who actually can create small projects or do their master's thesis on creating certain individual assistive device. And this kind of cooperation with the different universities in different themes is something that really helps today, because as I told in my presentation, there's a lot of new kind of problems arising because of this inclusive change, and the closer we go to individual needs, the closer we have to pay attention to persons' individual desires and wishes. And that's why sometimes students, they can go very close to the person and start asking, what kind of equipment do you need? How can I help you? And they start creating their own small project. And eventually it can end up having a very brilliant, very personalized device. But of course, this is a very new way of doing things. And in addition, for instance, when I mentioned the PAPAI project, Balti in Finnish, this is also an example of something we are doing in terms of education in a way, but at the same time, when students get their credits and learn how to cope with differences, how to have a dialogue with a different person with their different needs and wishes, they are helping the person to become active, or maybe creating more opportunities for the person. So I think one of the future's really important learning lessons is that we have to start doing more cooperation with students and ask them to do their master's thesis projects and so on. And it's very different from what earlier we used to do as parasport professionals. And yeah, it's sometimes very demanding also. But I have to say that in Finland, there are lots of very good universities and vocational training institutes, such as sports institutes, and they already have very good knowledge and very good teaching. So it's easy for us, it's easy to start from that basis and to do projects. But maybe it's different somewhere else.
Thanks, Aija. Good example. Peter wanted to comment, so it's your turn.
Thank you. I think that the question about sporting equipment is the same as the questions about inclusion, because we need to look outside, maybe because our world is not that big. We're not for the masses. The equipment is not for the masses. So I think it's our role. It's important that we look outside our small world towards these corporations. Either it's universities, technical or teachers or medical or whatever, and for also in the inclusion sector as well. So from our point of view, just to support this idea that it's our job, it's our responsibility to go outside our small box of parasport and look towards other sectors and other partners, like Aija said. So we need to pick up the stick and go. We need to do the offensive work. People are not coming to us because we're too small. There's no beneficial. If you see companies, they cannot make money on our equipment. So when we go to them and explain the importance of their role, then they say yes, but they won't go to us in the beginning. So we do like this. We turn around and say we need to do the offensive work, look outside our parasports organization or what we used to do to succeed in these matters, both inclusion and with the equipment development.
Thanks, Peter. The next theme or question will be a little bit about recruitment and demand and supply. So if I understand correct what Sabine is asking here in a few comments, asking about how the different programs have been succeeded in recruitment, but also when we are opening the doors for sport, we also need to find the athletes. And if we just make campaigns for people with disabilities, so please come and join, please enjoy parasports, come here. At the same time, we also need the clubs where you can go. We need to educate the trainers, chairmen, and so on. So we cannot do this if we don't do that. So we need both. Demand and supply goes hand in hand. Peter, you spoke about Rising Stars. That's quite a new thing. But is there anything already that you can share how that has been going?
Rising Stars has been going on for about a year, and as I mentioned in my presentation, we have almost no dropout because we have this very strong structure around the children we are recruiting. The first time they meet the sport is within the rehabilitation center with their parents. This handheld inclusion, so that the parents are feeling safe. Okay, now this role model, now this very competent coach is taking my child to a new sport. So many of these issues some parents has, they don't want to have their kids or their children feeling losses or regrets that they go to this sport. They've had many bad experience in the clubs. So by doing this handheld inclusion, we pick the special coach and the special club. That's a success with the Rising Stars, really handpicking the resources that works for the child and making the parents secure of their child going to the right club at the right time.
Where do you find the children?
We find it, it's, I say rehab centers. It's municipalities who have these child rehabilitation centers. They come for coaching, for training, for rehabilitation. So they're in this system, and the therapists at the centers, they know the child, they know their function, they know the energy of the child, and they have the dialogue with the parents as well. Mm-hmm. So in that structure, they know where to pinpoint the sport for the child and the family. So that in our case, they find the right sport at the first time, because we educate at the rehab centers. So the therapists know what is table tennis about, what are the physical demands, what is swimming about, what are the physical demands. So we're putting knowledge into the therapists and their knowledge about our sports and what it demands from the child as well. Okay.
I want to add something, but I also want that Linda tells a little bit about your impossible or possible. Okay, Aya first and then Linda.
Very shortly, and then Linda has, I'd like to hear also your examples from impossible. We have a very different approach from the Danish ones. I mean, we don't go to rehab centers and handpick the kids for our programs. We have thought about that. And I know there are people who want us to do that in order to get more Paralympic athletes or parasport competitive athletes. But we chose a different approach because we wanted every child to have an opportunity to be physically active. And then if they like the sports, then they maybe, some of them start to go towards their dreams. And that's why we created this Valtti Papai program. And we even have focused on kids who have no hobbies at all. So when we did the selection process, and if there were too many kids and too little of those Papai students, then we gave to prioritize those kids who have no hobbies at all in order to sort of be aware of that there are so many kids who don't qualify for the certain classification of parasports. And I know this is a long route and we have to do a lot of work and its demands are huge, but I think it's from the kind of, I think it's right thing to do, but it's a different approach, just to say.
Yeah, I think I think what Peter is sharing is really interesting, because I think that can be very effective, although it requires a lot of as I can hear it, it might not be that case, but it requires that you have really personnel, you have people, it's coordination, it's a lot of planning. It takes then, of course, money, because someone who is paid will have to coordinate this. I think when it comes to these camps, it's similar. It's also a challenge because it's quite, also you will also have to follow it. It have to be a coordinator. And I think what IA is saying is that we have to have some sort of combination. My belief is that we need to have these projects that we try to find ways where we can go around and really pinpoint and get good examples, so we can really move in that direction of really kind of time-consuming and quite expensive projects. At the same time, we need to work, as I is talking about, and also Mats, that how do we then also create those opportunities really on a wider scale? How do we influence what Inge is saying, the board members of the club, so they feel, okay, of course, this is obvious, this is an opportunity for us. How do we also the boards of the different sport federations say this of course we should have a plan and a budget for this. We need to move on with this now. It's time. We are far behind. So we need to work parallel. I think we need to have those specific projects. We need to work also with, and on the when it comes to assistive devices, I want to also say something about this, because I think it's also, I know that Viljar has talked about how can we also cooperate more in the Nordic country. I think it's really important also with our politicians, because we need to have those examples on municipalities, for example, those really good examples of municipalities who's doing really great, and share them. I know also in Denmark you've worked with that and tried to really showcase some of the municipalities. I know also from Mats, when we used to work with that big project with the municipalities for people with multi-disability. I think those also things that we can share among the Nordic countries. And we need to work in many different parallel things. But as you mentioned, it's volunteer-based organizations. Most of the clubs, especially in the rural areas, it's no one who's working there who gets paid. It has to be a passion. You need to, and it could not be so many thresholds. So it should be easy to really just get started and feel safe to be flexible and invite and so on. So yeah, I didn't talk that much about the camp, but I think it's also better and better because we are more and more integrating the different sport codes and making them responsible, and also the local clubs must be involved. So when I'm there as an athlete or potential athlete, I need to meet the people that I'm going to meet in the club. I'm going to meet when I'm talking to the federation and so on. So that's really a move that we've taken on also with the camps that didn't have that initially, but it's from now we are doing that from 2020.
Thanks, Linda. Mats?
Yeah, if there's time to just follow up on the recruitment part, because that's probably one of the main discussions in all countries around the world. How do we recruit more athletes? And I think at some point it's also lifting that perspective into something higher, because in Norway, 93% of all children in general joins a sport club, and this is quite similar in all the Nordic countries. It's just a natural part, and it's self-recruiting. And why isn't it that way with Paralympic athletes or people with disability? Well, because I would pinpoint one point especially, which is not the sports probably a way to solve it, but the employment rate of people with disability. If I was to pinpoint one problem in general, is that we keep people with disability out of working life. And it starts to turn into, because the children are taking out of physical education classes, they're taking to the doctor to find a diagnosis, they're taking to the physiotherapist to train. Most of the children that don't necessarily see themselves as different from the other kids in their class start to think, well, I'm a problem, I'm an expense, I'm a challenge, I'm a diagnose. And how do we turn this around? And I think that doing this is especially looking at a local level, because we can lift up our Paralympic role models, and that's an important part of recruiting. We see that when some of them are doing well in some of the sports, it's easier to recruit new athletes, of course. But the most important thing is probably looking at local role models. Who do we lift up in our club? If we have 2 or 3 athletes with disability, how can we show everybody in our local community this is actually a possibility in our club, in our team? How can we have local role models, and how can we strengthen the clubs to be able to recruit their athletes? Because in the end, it's all about getting a natural recruitment. We can't force anyone into activity. And if they don't identify themselves as physically active or as sport athletes, it's a really hard and long work to try and change that mindset with each individual. So I mean, it's a societal problem that we are trying to overcome, and we try to look at maybe barriers, and then our job is to try and find what are the best solutions. And I think we've heard a lot of great examples on different ways of doing that and finding ways around it. But it's also realizing that it's not natural for everybody in the same way as it is for usual athletes to take part in sport. And that's something we have to have in our baggage. We'll never have 93% of people with a disability in sport, unfortunately.
Thanks, Mats. Peter.
Just to pick up from Mats, and that's why our approach in a Danish content is looking outside our sports organization, because when we ask PE teachers, when we ask companies or clubs, trainers, municipality workers, they all say, yes, is it important for people with a disability to do sports like everybody else? So nobody disagrees. So it's like Mats says, how do we then face when everybody says, yes, of course they have to get access. Yes, of course they have to get the equipment. But how do we then turn around and see what's in it for me? And that's why we make this partnership approach, because a teacher, they want to know what's in it for me. Why is it important that I do the job? The therapist has to know why it's important I have to do the job, and what's my job in this? What's my part in this? Also the social workers, maybe they help the family go to school, drive the child to therapy and so on. What's my job in helping the child to local sports clubs? That's voluntary. So making a change in the focus and what's in it for me, why do I have to help? Like Mats said, it's a societal issue. So making people say, I need to do my part in this, because it's not normal. They're not just going to the sport like everybody else.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. We also had a comment about the parents' role and the example of Special Olympics, and we maybe understand when we have athletes with intellectual disabilities, they mainly come to training camps or even the trainings with the parents. At least in the beginning, the parents' role is really important. I think we cannot forget the parents' role is important, whether the child has a disability or does not have a disability. But I think we all a little bit agree that when a child has a disability, the first thing what the parent think is not the hobby, but they think about the school and do you have friends and so on, but not necessarily the hobby. There might be even the rehab and therapy goes first, and then somewhere down in the list. We also have examples of parents who've been very active, and when they get the child with a disability, the first thing is that, okay, what can we do? Can we still go skiing together as a family? So there is a lot of things. I think people just don't know what they can do. I put a link about PAPAI, not PAPAI, but Sport Empowers Disabled Youth Project, where it's a little bit about demand and supply. So there is a link in the chat box about this one. And lots of questions here. I think we'll take the Turkish example where about the Paralympic centers and the centers where they have people with disabilities, and this is quite far away from the situation that we have in the Nordic countries, because basically our societies are quite inclusive, so we don't have centers for people with disabilities. people are there, and I think the bigger problem is to find people to join sports than to establish a center where all the athletes are. But it's still the the inclusive PE classes. We need them all around the world, and the schools are really important role. Also the universities where you teach teachers. Erwin has a comment about triathlon and the unified triathlon or the unified sports that is really going on also in the Special Olympics when we do sports with athletes who have an intellectual disability. And but anyway, Mats has one comment, so we'll go on to Norway.
Thank you. Almost a mental transfer there. I don't know how you picked that up. Just to bring on that, I think organization-wise, I think we've talked about different Nordic ways of organizing it, and also getting some great examples here from both Germany and Turkey. I think there's different ways of looking at it, and the main reason is that we always have to have the athlete focus. What's best for the athlete? What does the athlete want? Because at some point we also have to admit that sitting here at an umbrella organization, I don't have a clue what Peter wants to do in Copenhagen. What kind of sport he wants to choose, how he wants to do it, if he wants to do it together with other people with disabilities and takes comfort in that, or if he wants to go to a fully inclusive club, or he wants to go to a different sports center. I think the only thing we have to focus on is what does the athlete want, and ask athletes, what's your interest? What kind of sport do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And what kind of matters? But interesting perspective to hear also from the other Nordic countries is how we focus on different I don't know, club build-ups in organizing it in different ways, and how open we are to organize it in different ways, no matter of how we're structured on top, being segregated groups or having a fully inclusive environments, or someone would like to build on that.
Yes, totally agree with you, Mats. One last comment, it's from Linda.
Actually, I wanted to talk about this because I think for us also who works with the NGO sector and the clubs, the grassroots clubs are the main sort of hubs for sport in general in our countries. The interesting thing is I actually got a call just before we started this panel discussion from one of our parasport clubs in the country that actually has the opportunity to have 2 employees. We have about 10 or so sport clubs today in Sweden that has employees. And what they've seen because of this, people are more talking about parasport in Sweden, is that other clubs come to them and want them to help them to start up, and which is fantastic. But then they're saying, but what shall we do now? Because our members, they are moving to other clubs, and then we are not getting the funding from our municipality and so on. So we need to really push now and not losing that opportunity in the local setting with that experience and that knowledge for the other clubs, which is local, to know the local context, the political environment, the financial environment, all of those kind of things. The rehabilitation center, how they already worked with them, rehabilitation, etc., etc. So we need to, that's one of the things we really need to not forget. And I believe very strongly, after also worked with Mats in Norway for quite some years, is that the clubs that are the deaf sport clubs, the clubs that are the parasport specific clubs, they are so important, and they will be that for a long time, because I identify myself as an athlete, as a member of the club, and it's different things that we identify ourselves with, right? It's the sport, but it's also the social setting, it's the environment. So we need to have both. I think the experience from Norway that I always share with people in Sweden is that many people are members in different clubs for different reasons. And we need to have that opportunity also in the future. So we have to make sure that these clubs are not closing down So because they're really good, important part, and also to create that safe environment that Mats was talking about in his presentation. Because then I feel, wow, now I was doing boccia, I tried this. Oh, maybe I want to try sailing in the sail club, because now I have I'm having a little bit more confidence, and I will do it with the sort of norm club for the sailing, because I want to try it. So it's creating that environment so you can take another step. So the club, that's how we are talking in Sweden, at least, not to forget how to work with this club environment.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks for everybody. Thanks for all the panelists. And Inge said it's about abilities, and that's one thing I want to underline here. It's about abilities, and it's our job to create opportunities. Thanks to you, and enjoy the ISAPA further on. Bye-bye.